The diner smelled like burnt coffee and desperation, a scent I'd grown so accustomed to that I barely noticed it anymore. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with that persistent electrical hum that made my temples throb after the 10th hour of my shift. My feet ached in shoes held together more by hope than stitching, and the weight of exhaustion pressed against my shoulders like an invisible hand pushing me deeper into the linoleum floor. I wiped down table 7 for what felt like the 100th time that night, my movements mechanical, practiced. The clock on the wall read 10:47 p.m., 13 minutes until my shift ended. 13 minutes until I could collapse into my studio apartment and pretend, for a few hours at least, that my life wasn't unraveling thread by thread. "Emma, you've got a 2-top at booth 12, Carol called from behind the counter, her voice carrying that edge of annoyance she always seemed to reserve for me. As if my mere existence was an inconvenience to her perfectly mediocre Tuesday night. I wanted to remind her that my shift ended in 12 minutes now, but I'd learned months ago that speaking up only made things worse. So I grabbed my notepad, plastered on the smile I'd perfected through years of swallowing my pride, and turned toward booth 12. That's when I saw them. The boy couldn't have been more than 5 years old, small for his age, with dark curls that fell across his forehead and eyes that seemed far too serious for someone so young. He sat rigidly in the worn vinyl seat, his hands folded on the table in front of him, staring at the laminated menu with an intensity that made my chest tighten. Next to him sat a man who didn't belong here. Even in the harsh fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill, he possessed a presence that seemed to bend the air around him. He wore simple clothes, a plain black t-shirt and dark jeans. But there was something in the way he carried himself, in the sharp line of his jaw and the controlled stillness of his posture, that screamed danger. His hair was dark, touched with gray at the temples, and when he glanced up at my approach, his eyes were the color of smoke before a storm. Those eyes swept over me in a single assessing glance that made me feel simultaneously invisible and completely exposed. "Good evening," I managed, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "What can I get you both tonight?" The man's gaze lingered on my face for a moment longer than comfortable, and I noticed the way his eyes caught on my name tag, then traveled down to my worn uniform, my scuffed shoes, before returning to meet my eyes. There was something calculating in that look, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "What do you recommend?" His voice was low, textured like expensive whiskey, with an accent I couldn't quite place. I blinked, momentarily thrown. In 3 years of working at Murphy's Diner, no one had ever asked me that question. The meatloaf is decent. The apple pie is homemade. We'll have 2 orders of meatloaf then. And milk for my son. He closed the menu without looking at it again, his attention now fixed entirely on me in a way that made my pulse quicken. "What time does your shift end?" The question caught me so off guard that I almost dropped my notepad. "I'm sorry? Your shift. When does it end?" He leaned back in the booth, one arm draped across the back of the seat, and despite the casual posture, there was nothing relaxed about him. He radiated a coiled tension, like a predator deciding whether or not to pounce. In 10 minutes. I didn't know why I answered. Everything in me screamed that I shouldn't engage, shouldn't give this stranger any information about myself. But the words tumbled out anyway. He nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something he already knew. "You look tired." It wasn't a question, but I found myself responding anyway. "Long shift. How many jobs do you work?" My fingers tightened around the notepad. This was veering into territory that made my skin prickle with unease. 2, sometimes 3, depending on the week. Something flickered across his face. Approval, maybe, or satisfaction. That's admirable. Hard work is becoming rare. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I simply nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "What's your name?" "It's on my name tag," I said, more sharply than I intended. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I can read, Emma. I'm asking you to tell me." The way he said my name sent a shiver down my spine, not entirely unpleasant, which disturbed me more than anything else. "I should put in your order, in a moment." He gestured to the empty seat across from his son. "Sit." "I can't. I'm working. Your shift ends in 8 minutes. Sit." It wasn't a request. The single word carried the weight of someone who was accustomed to being obeyed without question, and despite every instinct telling me to walk away, despite the alarm bells ringing in my head, I found myself sliding into the booth across from them. The boy? I noticed he still hadn't spoken, watched me with those solemn eyes, and up close, I could see the shadows beneath them, the slight tremor in his small hands. "What's your name?" I asked him gently, ignoring the man's presence for a moment. The boy glanced at his father, at least I assumed it was his father, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Luca," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. "That's a beautiful name." I smiled at him, a real smile this time, not the practiced one I used for customers. "Are you hungry, Luca?" He nodded, still not quite meeting my eyes. "My son doesn't speak much," the man said, and there was something in his tone, pain, maybe, or regret. "Not since his mother left." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. Instead, I pulled a wrapped mint from my apron pocket, the cheap kind the diner gave out with the checks, and slid it across the table to Luca. His eyes widened slightly, and he looked up at his father again. "It's okay," I told him softly. "You can have it." Luca's small fingers closed around the mint, and for the first time, the ghost of a smile touched his lips. When I looked back at the man, his expression had changed entirely. He was staring at me with an intensity that made my breath catch, his gray eyes burning with something I couldn't name. It was the look of someone who just discovered something valuable, something they intended to keep. "You're kind to him," he said quietly. "He's a child. Of course I'm kind to him. Not everyone is." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and the movement brought with it the faint scent of expensive cologne, cedar and smoke and something darker. "Most people see what they expect to see. A difficult child. A burden." "I see a little boy who's had his world turned upside down," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "I see someone who deserves gentleness." Something dangerous flashed in those gray eyes. "And what do you see when you look at me?" I should have lied. Should have given some bland, meaningless answer. But exhaustion had stripped away my filters, and the words came out before I could stop them. Someone pretending to be something they're not. The silence that followed was suffocating. The man's expression didn't change, but the air around us seemed to thicken, charged with a tension that made my heart race. I'd crossed a line, said too much, seen too much. Then, impossibly, he smiled. A real smile this time, one that transformed his entire face and made him look younger, less dangerous, more human. "Perceptive," he murmured, "and foolish. Those two qualities don't often coexist well." Before I could respond, Carol's shrill voice cut through the moment. "Emma, your shift ended 3 minutes ago. Stop bothering the customers and get their order in." I stood quickly, my face burning with embarrassment. "I'll get your food right away." His hand shot out, catching my wrist in a grip that was firm, but not painful. The contact sent electricity racing up my arm, and I froze, staring down at where his fingers wrapped around my skin. "I'll wait for you," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "After your shift, I'd like to talk." "I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not asking what you think. I'm telling you what's going to happen." He released my wrist, but the sensation of his touch lingered like a brand. "You're going to clock out, and we're going to have a conversation, a simple one. And if I refuse?" That not-quite smile returned. "You won't." The confidence in his voice should have angered me, should have made me want to prove him wrong. But there was something magnetic about him. Something that drew me in even as every rational part of my brain screamed warnings. I pulled away and hurried to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I clipped the order to the wheel. My wrist still tingled where he'd touched me, and I rubbed at the spot absently, trying to erase the sensation. What was I doing? I didn't know this man. Didn't know anything about him except that he radiated danger and seemed to see through every defense I'd carefully constructed. I should leave through the back door, should go home and forget this entire encounter. But when I glanced back at booth 12, Luca was unwrapping the mint with careful, deliberate movements, and his father was watching me with those smoke-gray eyes, and I knew, with a certainty that terrified me that I wasn't going anywhere. When their food was ready, I delivered it with trembling hands. The man, I still didn't know his name, watched me set down the plates, his gaze never wavering. "Thank you," Luca whispered, and the sound of his small voice saying those words made my chest ache. "You're welcome, sweetheart." I turned to leave, but the man's voice stopped me once more. "Emma." I looked back. "Don't even think about running." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And as I walked back to the counter to clock out, my hands still shaking, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just irrevocably changed, and that the man in booth 12 had orchestrated the entire thing. I clocked out with fingers that refused to stay steady, watching the timestamp print across my card. 11:03 p.m. 3 minutes past the end of my shift. 3 minutes that Carol would probably dock from my next paycheck, because she was petty like that. But for once, I couldn't bring myself to care about Carol's vindictiveness or the lost wages. The man in booth 12 had done something to me with that single conversation, cracked open something I'd kept carefully sealed for the past 2 years. Hope, maybe, or curiosity, or just the desperate, pathetic need to be seen by someone, anyone, as more than just invisible. I gathered my worn purse from my locker, avoiding my reflection in the small mirror taped inside the door. I knew what I'd see. Exhaustion carved into every line of my face, dark circles under my eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun that had given up any pretense of neatness hours ago. I looked exactly like what I was. A 26-year-old woman drowning in debt and disappointment, working herself to death for pennies and stale coffee. When I pushed through the kitchen doors back into the main dining area, my breath caught. The diner was nearly empty now, just old Mr. Patterson hunched over his usual cup of decaf in the corner and a trucker I didn't recognize at the counter. Booth 12 sat vacant, the plates cleared, and for a moment, relief and disappointment warred in my chest. He'd left. Of course he'd left. Men like that didn't actually wait around for exhausted waitresses. Whatever game he'd been playing, whatever strange impulse had made him notice me, it had passed. Then I saw him. He stood just outside the diner's front entrance, visible through the grimy glass doors, his silhouette backlit by the parking lot's flickering streetlight. Luca stood beside him, his small hand enveloped in his father's much larger one, and even from this distance, I could see the way the boy leaned against the man's leg, seeking comfort or safety or both. My feet carried me forward before my brain could catch up, pushing through the doors into the cool October night. The air smelled like rain and asphalt, and the wind immediately found every gap in my thin jacket, making me shiver. The man turned at the sound of the door, and in the amber glow of the streetlight, he looked even more dangerous than he had inside. Shadows played across the sharp angles of his face, and his eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire that made my pulse quicken. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, though his tone suggested he'd been absolutely certain I would. I almost didn't. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly hyper-aware of how vulnerable I was, alone in a parking lot with a strange man and his son, with only Mr. Patterson and a trucker who wouldn't hear me scream from inside. "I don't even know your name." "Marco." He said it simply, as if the name should mean something to me. When my expression remained blank, something flickered across his face, satisfaction maybe. "And you're Emma Sullivan, 26 years old. You work 3 jobs, this diner, a cleaning service on weekends, and occasional shifts at the grocery store on 5th Street. You live alone in a studio apartment on the east side. You have student loans you'll never be able to repay from a degree you never finished. You have no family, no close friends, no one who would notice if you disappeared." The blood drained from my face. "How do you know all that?" He took a step closer, and I fought the urge to retreat. "I make it my business to know things, Emma. Especially about people who interest me. I'm calling the police." My hand fumbled for my phone, but it was dead. Had been dead since this afternoon when I couldn't afford to stop and charge it between shifts. "No, you're not." His voice remained calm, almost gentle. "Because if you were truly afraid of me, you would have run the moment you saw me waiting. But you didn't. You walked out here, and you're still standing here, because some part of you recognizes what this is." "And what is this?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. An opportunity. He gestured toward the parking lot, and for the first time, I noticed the car parked in the shadows. A black sedan that looked expensive even in the darkness, its windows tinted so dark they seemed to absorb light. "Get in the car, Emma. We need to talk, and not here." "You're insane if you think I'm getting in a car with a stranger who just admitted to stalking me. I haven't been stalking you. I had you investigated. There's a difference." He said it so matter-of-factly that I almost laughed. A hysterical bubble of sound that died in my throat. "And I'm not a stranger anymore. I'm Marco Valente, and I have a proposition for you." The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it, with absolute confidence that it should, made my skin prickle. I'm not interested in any proposition from someone who invades people's privacy. Not even one that would solve all your financial problems, clear your debts, give you the security you've been desperately trying to find through 3 minimum wage jobs. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt pinned beneath that stare, unable to look away. Not even one that would change your entire life? I wanted to say no, wanted to turn around and walk away from whatever dangerous game this was. But my rent was 3 weeks overdue. My electricity would be shut off next Tuesday if I didn't make a payment, and I'd been eating ramen and stale diner food for so long that I'd forgotten what a real meal tasted like. What kind of proposition? The words felt like a betrayal of my own common sense. Marco's lips curved into that dangerous, almost smile. The kind we discuss somewhere private. The kind that requires trust, which I understand I'm asking a lot of. But look at my son. Emma, I did. Luca stood silently beside his father, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, his small body swaying slightly as he fought sleep, and despite everything, despite the fear and the alarm bells, and the absolute insanity of this situation, my heart ached for this child who'd been dragged out so late, who looked at the world with such wariness. "He needs someone," Marco said quietly, and for the first time, I heard genuine emotion beneath his controlled exterior. Someone who sees him the way you did tonight. Someone who doesn't look at him like he's broken. "What happened to his mother?" I asked, even though I knew I shouldn't engage, shouldn't let myself be drawn further into whatever web he was spinning. She chose her own interests over her son's well-being. She chose to betray everything she claimed to hold sacred. The words were clipped, hard with barely contained rage. And when she left, she took something from Luca that I can't give back. She took his ability to trust, his innocence, his voice. I looked at Luca again, really looked at him, and saw past the expensive clothes that Marco had dressed him in to play poor. Saw past the carefully neutral expression. I saw trauma. I saw a child who'd learned too young that the world could hurt him, that the people who were supposed to protect him could wound him most deeply, and despite every rational thought screaming at me to walk away, I heard myself say, 20 minutes. You get 20 minutes to explain, and then I'm leaving. And it has to be somewhere public. Marco's smile widened, genuine this time. There's a cafe 3 blocks from here. Canto's, still open. We'll take separate cars if it makes you feel safer. I don't have a car. Then you'll ride with us. But I'll give you my phone. You can hold on to it. Call anyone you want. Record the entire conversation if it makes you feel better. He pulled out an expensive-looking smartphone and held it out to me. I'm not trying to hurt you, Emma. I'm trying to help us both. I took the phone with shaking hands, its weight unfamiliar and foreign. People like me didn't have phones like this. Phones that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Why me? There are thousands of women in this city. Why would you choose someone like me? Because someone like you is exactly what Luca needs. Someone who knows what it means to struggle, to survive, to keep going even when everything is falling apart. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. Someone who hasn't been corrupted by money or power. Someone real. The irony of him saying that while admitting he'd been pretending to be poor wasn't lost on me. But I was too tired and too curious and too desperate to point it out. We walked to the car in silence, Luca's hand still firmly clasped in his father's. Up close, I could see that the sedan was even more impressive than I'd thought. Some luxury brand I didn't recognize, with chrome details that caught the streetlight and gleamed like silver. Marco opened the back door, and I glimpsed leather seats, dark wood trim, an interior that smelled like money and power. "I'll sit in back with you," Marco said, helping Luca climb in first. "So you don't feel trapped." I slid in beside Luca, hyper-aware of the enclosed space. The way the doors closed with a heavy, final thunk that sounded like a bank vault ceiling. Marco settled in on Luca's other side. And that's when I noticed the driver for the first time. A broad-shouldered man in a dark suit who hadn't been visible through the tinted windows. The driver pulled smoothly out of the parking lot without a word, without even glancing back at us, and I realized with a cold jolt of understanding that this was planned. All of it. Marco hadn't just happened to come to the diner tonight. This was calculated, orchestrated, a trap I'd walked into with my eyes wide open. "You're afraid," Marco observed, his voice neutral. "Your pulse is racing. You're gripping my phone so hard your knuckles are white. You just made me realize this was all a setup, that you targeted me specifically, that nothing about tonight was coincidence." I forced myself to meet his eyes, to not show him how terrified I really was. "So yes, I'm afraid. Any sane person would be. Fear and sanity often go hand in hand." His gaze flickered to Luca, who was already fighting sleep, his head nodding forward. "But so do opportunity and risk. The question is whether you're brave enough to take the risk for the potential reward. You haven't told me what the reward is yet, or what you want from me. Patience, Emma. We're almost there." The cafe, when we arrived, was nothing like I expected. Cantos occupied the ground floor of what looked like a renovated warehouse, all exposed brick and dim lighting and the rich smell of espresso and fresh pastries. At 11:30 at night, it should have been closed, but the lights were on, and I could see a barista behind the counter, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been waiting for us. Another setup, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Marco lifted Luca from the car. The boy had fallen asleep during the short drive, and carried him inside with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything else about him. The driver remained with the vehicle, and I noticed how his eyes constantly scanned the street, the windows, the shadows, security, protection. Just who was Marco Valente? Inside, Marco laid Luca down on a leather couch in a corner booth, tucking his jacket around the sleeping child with careful attention. Then he gestured for me to sit across from him at the small table, and the barista appeared instantly with 2 espressos and a plate of biscotti that I knew I hadn't seen him prepare. "You own this place," I said. Not a question. "I own a lot of places." Marco took a sip of his espresso, his eyes never leaving my face. "The diner where you work isn't one of them, in case you're wondering. That was genuine reconnaissance, finding somewhere you felt comfortable." "Nothing about this is making me comfortable." "Good. Comfort makes people complacent. I need you sharp for what I'm about to propose." He set down his cup, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "I need a mother for my son. Not a nanny, not a babysitter, not some hired help. A mother, someone who will love him, protect him, put his needs above everything else." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I laughed. A sharp, disbelieving sound. "You're insane." "I'm practical. Luca has been through 3 nannies in the past year. Each one saw a paycheck, not a child. Each one failed him. But tonight, I watched you give him a cheap mint and smile at him like he mattered, and he smiled back, the first real smile I've seen from him in months." Marco's voice carried absolute conviction. "You have something he needs, something money can't buy. So you want to buy me instead?" The bitterness in my voice was sharp enough to cut. "What exactly are you proposing? That I marry you? Play house with a stranger and his traumatized son?" "Yes." He said it simply, without hesitation. "Marry me. Live in my home. Be a mother to Luca. In exchange, I'll pay off every debt you have. Give you a salary of $200,000 a year. Provide you with security and comfort you've never known. All I ask is that you give my son the stability and love he deserves." The number hit me like a physical blow. $200,000. I made barely $20,000 a year across all 3 jobs, working myself into an early grave for pennies. That kind of money would change everything, but nothing in life was free, especially not offers that sounded too good to be true. "What's the catch?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt, because there's always a catch. Marco's smile was sharp as a blade. "The catch, Emma, is that once you agree, you're mine. Completely. There's no backing out, no changing your mind. You belong to my world, and my world is not safe. It's not simple. And it's not the kind of place you can just walk away from. What exactly is your world, Marco? He held my gaze, and in his eyes, I saw darkness and danger and secrets that would probably destroy me if I knew them. The kind where men like me don't pretend to be poor for fun. The kind where my son needs protection because there are people who would hurt him to get to me. The kind where till death do us part might come much sooner than you'd like. And there it was. The truth beneath the expensive suit and the calculated kindness. Marco Valente wasn't just wealthy. He was dangerous, powerful, possibly criminal. I should have stood up, should have walked out and never looked back. Instead, I glanced at Luca, sleeping peacefully on the couch, his small face finally relaxed in a way it hadn't been when he was awake. I thought about my empty apartment, my unpaid bills, the bone-deep exhaustion that was slowly killing me. I thought about working 3 jobs until I was 40, 50, 60, and still never having enough to feel secure. And I thought about how long it had been since anyone had looked at me the way Marco had tonight. Like I mattered. Like I was worth something. I need to think about it, I said finally. Marco shook his head slowly. No. You decide now, tonight. This offer expires when you walk out that door. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Emma. You of all people should know that. He leaned back, his posture relaxed but his eyes intense. I'm offering you a way out of the hell you're living in. All you have to do is say yes. My hands trembled as I set down his phone. And if I say no, then you go back to your life and I find someone else, and you'll spend the rest of your days wondering what might have been, watching your dreams die a little more each day until there's nothing left but survival. His voice was merciless, cutting through every defense I had. Is that really what you want, to be invisible forever? The words hit their mark, burrowing deep into the part of me that I'd tried so hard to kill. The part that still dreamed of something more, something better. The part that was screaming at me to take the risk, to leap into the unknown, to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the escape I'd been praying for. If I say yes, I whispered, what happens next? Marco's smile was triumphant. We get married within the week. You move into my home. You become Luca's mother in every way that matters. And you never work another minimum wage job again. And you? What do you get out of this besides a mother for your son? His eyes darkened with something that made heat pool in my stomach. That remains to be seen, doesn't it? The answer should have terrified me. Instead, it sent a thrill of something dangerous racing through my veins. Anticipation mixed with fear. Desire mixed with dread. I looked at Luca one more time, at this broken little boy who needed someone to see him, to care for him, to give him back some small piece of what had been stolen from him. And then I looked at Marco, at this dangerous, powerful man, who had orchestrated this entire meeting, who had researched me and targeted me, and was now offering me a devil's bargain wrapped in temptation. Yes, I heard myself say, the word barely a breath, I'll do it. Marco's smile was pure satisfaction, dark and possessive. Excellent. Then let's discuss the terms of your surrender. The word surrender echoed in my mind as Marco pulled out a leather portfolio from seemingly nowhere, though I suspected the ever-watchful barista had delivered it while I'd been staring at Luca. Inside were documents, crisp and official-looking, with letterhead that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A prenuptial agreement, Marco explained, sliding the papers across the table. Standard protection for both parties. You'll have your own lawyer review it, of course. I don't have a lawyer. You do now. Her name is Patricia Mendez, one of the best family law attorneys in the city. She'll be at your apartment tomorrow at 9 a.m. He said it with such casual certainty that I realized objecting would be pointless. Marco had already planned every step of this, probably weeks in advance. I scanned the documents, but the legal jargon blurred together. Words like irrevocable and binding and forfeit jumped out at me, making my chest tight. I can't understand any of this. That's what Patricia is for, but I'll give you the summary. Marco leaned forward, his fingers steepled under his chin. You agree to be Luca's mother, attending to his emotional, educational, and physical needs. You'll live in my home, appear at my side when required for social obligations, and maintain the appearance of a legitimate marriage. In exchange, all your current debts will be cleared within 48 hours. You'll receive a salary deposited monthly into an account in your name. After 1 year, if you've fulfilled your obligations, you'll receive a bonus of $500,000. The number made my head spin, and if I want to leave before the year? Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. You won't. But if I do, then you forfeit everything, the salary, the bonus, all of it, and you'll find that your debts have mysteriously reappeared, along with some new complications. His voice remained calm, almost pleasant, but the threat beneath was unmistakable. I'm not a man who tolerates betrayal, Emma. Ask Luca's mother about that, if you can find her. The implication sent ice through my veins. What did you do to her? Nothing she didn't bring upon herself. She stole from me. Money, yes. But more importantly, time with my son during his formative years. She introduced him to a man who hurt him in ways I'm still discovering. His jaw clenched, and I saw the first crack in his controlled facade. She's alive, if that's what you're asking. Alive and living very far away from here, under circumstances that ensure she'll never come near Luca again. I should have pressed for details, should have demanded to know exactly what kind of man I was agreeing to tie myself to. But some instinct for self-preservation kept my mouth shut. There's something else, Marco continued, pulling out another document. A non-disclosure agreement. What you see, what you hear, what you learn about me and my business, it all stays confidential. Forever. Violating this agreement has consequences I'd prefer not to detail. Your business, I repeated slowly. What exactly do you do, Marco? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Import and export, logistics, international trade, nothing you need to concern yourself with. The vagueness was deliberate, another red flag in a sea of warnings. But I was so far past the point of turning back that one more secret hardly seemed to matter. I'll need to give notice at my jobs, I said, trying to grasp for some semblance of normalcy in this surreal negotiation. Already handled. As of tonight, you're no longer employed at the diner, the cleaning service, or the grocery store. Carol received a very generous donation to her retirement fund in exchange for releasing you immediately. The others were similarly compensated. The casual way he'd dismantled my entire life in a matter of hours should have enraged me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. No more aching feet, no more grease burns, no more of Carol's petty cruelty. My apartment, the lease will be terminated. Your belongings will be moved to my home tomorrow afternoon. You'll stay tonight in a hotel, the Peninsula Presidential Suite. Everything you need is already arranged. You're very sure of yourself. I'm very good at reading people. I knew you'd say yes the moment you sat down at my table in the diner. He reached across and took my hand, his touch sending electricity up my arm. You're drowning, Emma. I'm offering you a lifeline. Only a fool would refuse. His thumb traced circles on my palm, an intimate gesture that felt both comforting and possessive. I should have pulled away, but the warmth of human contact after so long being invisible was intoxicating. When do we get married? My voice sounded distant, like someone else was asking the question. Saturday. 4 days from now. It will be a small ceremony at my home, just immediate family and a few trusted associates. You'll need a dress. I've arranged for a designer to meet you at the hotel tomorrow afternoon. You've thought of everything. That's what I do. I think of every possibility, every contingency, every threat. It's how I've survived this long. His grip on my hand tightened slightly. And it's how I'll keep you and Luca safe. The word safe should have been comforting. Instead, it reminded me that there were things to be kept safe from. Dangers I couldn't yet see, but that lurked in the shadows of Marco's world. A soft sound from the couch made us both turn. Luca was stirring, his small face scrunching as he fought waking. Marco released my hand immediately, moving to his son with a speed and grace that surprised me. "Shh, Piccolo," he murmured, brushing Luca's hair back from his forehead. "Sleep. We'll be home soon." The tenderness in his voice, the gentleness of his touch, it was at such odds with the calculating man who'd just systematically trapped me into an agreement I barely understood. Watching him with Luca, I caught a glimpse of who Marco might have been in another life. without whatever darkness drove him now. Luca's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and heavy. They found me across the cafe, and for a moment, I saw something like hope flicker there. "Emma," he whispered, my name barely audible, my heart clenched. "I'm here, sweetheart. Are you coming home with us?" The question hung in the air, weighted with more meaning than a 5-year-old should be able to convey. Marco's eyes locked onto mine over his son's head, challenging me, daring me to disappoint the child. "Yes," I said softly, sealing my fate with that single word. "I'm coming home with you." Luca's smile was pure sunshine breaking through storm clouds, and in that moment, I knew I was lost. Whatever else Marco had planned, whatever dangers lurked in his world, I couldn't walk away from that smile. "We should go," Marco said, lifting Luca easily into his arms. "It's late, and tomorrow will be demanding." The ride to the hotel passed in a blur. Luca fell asleep again almost immediately, his head resting against his father's shoulder, and I stared out the tinted windows at the city lights streaking by. My city, except it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like I was seeing it through new eyes, from the other side of an invisible barrier that separated people like Marco from people like who I used to be. The peninsula loomed ahead, all glass and steel and old money elegance. A valet appeared before the car even fully stopped, opening my door with practiced efficiency. Marco emerged from the other side, Luca still cradled against his chest, and handed off his keys without a word. Inside, the lobby was hushed and opulent, all marble and crystal and flowers that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The desk clerk took one look at Marco and immediately straightened, recognition and something like fear flashing across his face. "Mr. Valente, your suite is ready. Is there anything else you require?" "Privacy," Marco said simply, and the clerk paled slightly before nodding. We took a private elevator to the top floor, the silence broken only by the soft sound of Luca's breathing. When the doors opened, they revealed a hallway with only 2 doors, both leading to presidential suites, I assumed. Marco led me to the left door, which opened at his touch. Pre-programmed, like everything else in this orchestrated seduction. Inside, the suite was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, a bedroom visible through French doors that probably had a bed bigger than my entire studio apartment. "The bedroom is through there," Marco said, gesturing. "Everything you need is in the closet and bathroom. Clothes, toiletries, anything Patricia or the designer might require tomorrow. Room service is available 24 hours. Order whatever you want." "You're not staying?" The question escaped before I could stop it, and I immediately regretted the note of something almost like disappointment in my voice. His smile was knowing. "Not tonight. We're not married yet, and despite what you might think of me, I have certain standards. Besides, Luca needs to be home in his own bed." He shifted his son's weight slightly, and Luca mumbled something in his sleep. "But make no mistake, Emma, after Saturday, you belong to me. Completely." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it sent heat coursing through my body, pooling low in my belly. What was wrong with me? Why did his dominance, his control, make my pulse race instead of sending me running? "I'll send a car for you at 8:30 tomorrow," Marco continued. "Patricia will be here at 9, the designer at 2. Someone will bring lunch. You won't be alone or unattended." "I'm a prisoner then. You're protected. There's a difference." He moved closer, and despite Luca sleeping between us, the air grew thick with tension. "People in my world, once they know about you, might try to use you to get to me. Until our marriage is public knowledge, you're vulnerable. After Saturday, you'll wear my ring and carry my name, and that will be protection enough." "Protection from what?" "From people who think they can take what's mine." His free hand came up to cup my cheek, his thumb tracing my lower lip. "Sleep well, Emma. Tomorrow your new life begins." He was gone before I could respond, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that made my breath catch. I stood alone in the suite, surrounded by luxury I'd never imagined, and the reality of what I'd just agreed to crashed over me like a wave. I'd sold myself. Not in the traditional sense, maybe, but sold nonetheless. My freedom, my autonomy, my entire future, all signed over to a dangerous man I didn't know for the sake of financial security and a little boy's smile. And the most terrifying part, I didn't regret it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I moved to the bedroom in a daze, finding the closet exactly as Marco had promised. Full of clothes in my size, from casual wear to elegant dresses I'd never have occasion to wear in my old life. The bathroom held luxury products, makeup, even a silk robe hanging on the door. He'd known my size, had known I'd say yes, had prepared for this moment with the same calculating precision he probably applied to every aspect of his life. I should have been furious at the presumption. Instead, I felt something darker, anticipation for what came next, for who I might become in Marco Valente's world, for the woman who would wear his ring and raise his son, and navigate whatever dangers lurked in the shadows of his empire. I climbed into the enormous bed, sinking into sheets that felt like clouds, and stared at the ceiling as the city lights filtered through the windows. Somewhere out there, Marco was putting Luca to bed, probably reading him a story or checking under the bed for monsters. Normal father things that seemed incongruous with everything else I knew about him. In 4 days, I would marry him. In 4 days, I would become someone new, someone who belonged to Marco's world, with all its darkness and danger and devastating promise. My phone, my old, cracked phone that had died hours ago, sat uselessly in my purse. I had no one to call anyway, no one who would miss me or worry about my sudden transformation. That loneliness, that invisibility I'd complained about, was exactly what made me perfect for Marco's purposes. No one to miss me meant no one to ask questions. No one to worry meant no one to protect. I was alone in the world, and Marco had seen that vulnerability and exploited it with ruthless efficiency. But he'd also offered me something precious. Purpose. Luca needed me. Maybe Marco did too, in his own twisted way, and I needed them. Needed to matter to someone, to be more than just another exhausted face in the crowd. As I drifted toward sleep in that enormous bed, wrapped in luxury and surrounded by silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a deal with the devil himself. The only question was whether I'd survive long enough to regret it. Morning arrived with cruel brightness, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows I'd forgotten to cover. I woke disoriented, tangled in sheets that cost more than a month's rent, my body aching with the kind of deep exhaustion that came from too many emotions compressed into too few hours. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. The diner, Marco, the proposal, just another stress-induced fantasy my overtired brain had conjured. Then I saw the closet full of expensive clothes, the designer toiletries in the bathroom, and reality crashed back with suffocating weight. I'd agreed to marry a man I didn't know. A dangerous man. In 4 days. My phone sat dead on the nightstand, and I realized with a start that I had no charger. Of course, Marco wouldn't have thought of that. He probably had people whose entire job was managing his electronics. I was about to call the front desk when I noticed a new phone on the dresser, sleek and expensive, with a note in bold, masculine handwriting. Your new number. My contact is already programmed. Use it wisely. M. I picked up the phone with trembling fingers. It unlocked with my face. He'd somehow programmed my biometrics without my knowledge, which should have terrified me, but instead just felt like another inevitability. The contact list contained exactly 3 entries: Marco, Patricia Mendez, and emergency services. A text from Marco waited, sent at 6:47 a.m. Good morning. Breakfast is being delivered at 8 Salon. Patricia arrives at 9 Salon. Be ready. The car will bring you to me at 5 Salos p.m. Wear the blue dress in the closet. Luca wants to show you his room. I read it 3 times, analyzing every word for hidden meaning. The command about the dress rankled. I wasn't used to being told what to wear, but the mention of Luca softened my irritation. He wanted to show me his room. He was excited about my presence in his life. That had to mean something, had to make this entire insane situation worthwhile. Breakfast arrived exactly at 8, wheeled in by a server who didn't make eye contact and disappeared before I could think to tip him. The spread was absurd. Fresh fruit, pastries, eggs prepared 3 different ways, smoked salmon, yogurt, granola, fresh squeezed juice. I stood staring at it, overwhelmed by the sheer excess. In my old life, breakfast was instant coffee and whatever stale pastry the diner was throwing out. Now I had more food in front of me than I'd typically eat in a week, artfully arranged on china that probably cost more than my security deposit. I forced myself to eat, choosing the simplest items: toast, fruit, coffee that tasted like heaven. My stomach, accustomed to neglect and cheap calories, protested the richness. Patricia Mendez arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, exactly as promised. She was a woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, with sharp eyes that assessed me in a single glance, and probably catalogued every weakness, every vulnerability. "Emma Sullivan," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I'm Patricia. I'll be representing your interests in this arrangement." "My interests," I repeated, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike. "Somehow I doubt Marco is paying you to represent my interest over his." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "You're smarter than he gave you credit for." "Good, that will make this easier." She settled into one of the suite's elegant chairs, opening a leather briefcase. "I'm going to be very direct with you, Emma. Marco Valente is one of the most powerful men in this city. He's also one of the most dangerous. The prenuptial agreement you'll be signing is designed to protect him, yes, but also to protect you from the fallout of his world." "What kind of fallout?" "The kind that gets people killed." She said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that it took a moment for the words to register. "Marco operates in circles where loyalty is currency and betrayal is paid for in blood. By marrying him, you're entering a world with very specific rules. Break them, and the consequences are severe." My mouth went dry. He told me about import and export, international trade. Patricia's laugh was short and humorless. "Is that what he called it? How delicate." She pulled out the prenuptial agreement, the same document I'd seen last night. "Marco Valente is the head of one of the largest criminal organizations on the East Coast. Drugs, weapons, money laundering. If it's illegal and profitable, his family has a hand in it. He inherited the empire from his father 5 years ago and has been consolidating power ever since." The room spun. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to process what she was saying. "He's a mob boss. The term is somewhat outdated, but essentially, yes. His organization prefers to think of themselves as businessmen operating outside traditional legal constraints. But the reality is what it is." Patricia's expression softened slightly. "I'm telling you this because you need to understand what you're walking into. Marco may seem civilized, controlled, even kind when it comes to his son. But he's built his empire on violence and fear. The man you met last night, that's the version of himself he allows the world to see. The truth is much darker." I thought about the way Marco had touched me, the possessiveness in his voice, the casual threats wrapped in elegant words. I'd sensed the danger, but I'd convinced myself it was manageable. Controllable. I'd been an idiot. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. "If you work for him." "I work for him. But I also have a conscience, and I've seen too many young women destroyed by men like Marco to stay silent." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "I'm giving you one chance, Emma. One opportunity to walk away before it's too late. Say the word, and I'll have you on a plane to anywhere in the country by tonight. New identity, enough money to start over, completely untraceable. Marco will be furious, but he won't be able to find you. It was a lifeline. An escape route. Everything rational in me screamed to take it, to run as far and fast as possible from Marco Valente and his dark empire. But then I thought of Luca, of his solemn eyes and tentative smile, of the way he'd whispered my name like a prayer. "What happened to his mother?" I asked. "The real story." Patricia sighed, sitting back. "Her name was Isabella. She was Marco's childhood sweetheart. Or so the story goes. They married young, had Luca, and for a while it seemed like a fairy tale. But Isabella was ambitious. She wanted more than being a mob wife. She started skimming money from Marco's operations, planning to disappear with her lover, a man named Raphael who worked for a rival family. Marco found out. Of course he did. Marco finds out everything eventually. What he discovered was worse than the theft. Raphael had been grooming Luca, using the boy to get information about Marco's movements his security. There was evidence suggesting Raphael had been inappropriately touching Luca, though the full extent... She trailed off, her expression pained. Luca stopped talking shortly after. He hasn't spoken more than a few words to anyone except Marco since. Nausea rose in my throat. What did Marco do? Raphael disappeared. Completely. No body was ever found, but no one doubts he's dead. Isabella was given a choice: leave the country and never contact Luca again, or face the same fate as her lover. She chose survival. She's somewhere in South America now, living under an assumed name with a monthly allowance that ensures her silence. The brutality of it should have horrified me. And it did. But it was also justice of a sort, protection of a child from monsters. The legal system might have failed Luca, but Marco's brand of justice hadn't. Luca needs help, I said quietly. Professional help. Therapy. He's been seeing 3 different specialists. None of them have made any progress. He doesn't trust them. Doesn't feel safe enough to open up. Patricia watched me carefully, but last night, Marco called me at midnight, something he never does unless it's an emergency. He told me Luca smiled, really smiled, for the first time in almost a year. Because of you. Tears pricked my eyes. I just gave him a mint. I was kind to him. Sometimes kindness is the most radical thing we can offer someone who's been hurt. Luca sees something in you, Emma. Something he needs. The question is whether you're willing to give it to him, knowing what it will cost you. I looked out the window at the city below, at all those people going about their normal lives, unaware of the dark currents that flowed beneath the surface. I'd been one of them just yesterday, invisible, struggling, but free. Choosing Marco meant giving up that freedom, stepping into a world of danger and darkness. But it also meant saving a little boy who desperately needed someone to love him, someone to see him, someone to help him find his voice again. I'm staying, I said firmly. Whatever the risks, whatever the cost, Luca needs me. I can't walk away from that. Patricia studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I hope you don't come to regret that decision. Now let's go through this agreement so you at least understand what you're signing. We spent the next 2 hours dissecting every clause, every provision. The financial arrangements were staggering. Beyond the salary and bonus Marco had mentioned, there were clauses about housing, security, healthcare, even a trust fund being established in my name that I couldn't touch for 5 years, but would be worth millions if I stayed that long. There were also the darker provisions. The non-disclosure agreement with its vague but menacing consequences, the clause stating I couldn't leave the country without Marco's explicit permission. The section detailing my responsibilities not just to Luca, but to Marco's organization, appearing at events, maintaining the image of a devoted wife, never questioning his business dealings. I was signing away my autonomy, my freedom, my entire life. In exchange for what? Money, security, and the chance to help one traumatized child. It should have felt like a terrible bargain. Instead, it felt like purpose. By the time Patricia left at noon, my head was spinning with legal terminology and implications. The designer arrived promptly at 2, a rail-thin woman named Sylvie, who spoke with a French accent and regarded me with the clinical detachment of someone assessing a mannequin. You have good bone structure, she announced, circling me like a predator. But you are too thin. We will need to pad certain areas. And your skin. When did you last have a facial? I've never had a facial. Her expression suggested I'd just confessed to murder. Unacceptable. Marco wants you perfect for Saturday. We have much work to do. The next 3 hours were a blur of measurements, fabric samples, and Sylvie's increasingly creative French cursing as she tried to find styles that would transform me from exhausted waitress to society wife. By the time she left, I had a wedding dress being custom-made and an entire wardrobe planned for the next 6 months. I'd also been scheduled for a facial, a massage, a manicure, a pedicure, and something Sylvie called a full body polish that sounded both expensive and vaguely threatening. At exactly 5 o'clock, my new phone buzzed with a text from Marco. The car is waiting. Don't keep us waiting. I found the blue dress he'd mentioned, a simple but elegant sheath that hugged my curves and fell just above my knees. It fit perfectly, of course, Everything in this new life of mine fit perfectly, because Marco had planned it that way. The same driver from last night waited by the black sedan, opening the door with a small nod. This time, I noticed the bulge under his jacket that suggested a concealed weapon. Security. Protection from the dangers that came with being Marco Valente's. The drive took us out of the city center, through increasingly upscale neighborhoods, until we entered an area of estates, hidden behind high walls and elaborate gates. The sedan turned into a private drive, stopping at a gate that looked like it belonged to a fortress. Guards, actual armed guards, checked the car before waving us through. Marco's home appeared at the end of a tree-lined drive, and my breath caught. It wasn't a house. It was a mansion, all stone and glass and architectural elegance, sprawling across perfectly manicured grounds that probably required a team of gardeners to maintain. This was where I would live, where I would raise Luca, where I would become Mrs. Marco Valente. The car stopped at the front entrance, where Marco stood waiting. He wore dark slacks and a white shirt rolled to his elbows, looking somehow both casual and impossibly elegant. But it was Luca beside him who captured my attention, bouncing slightly on his toes, his eyes bright with excitement. The moment I stepped out of the car, Luca ran to me. "Emma, you came. Papa said you would, and you did." The words tumbled out in a rush, more than I'd heard him speak combined yesterday. I knelt down to his level, my heart swelling. Of course I came. I promised, didn't I? Do you want to see my room? I have so many things to show you. And Papa said you're going to live here now. With us. Forever. Forever. The word should have felt like a chain. Instead, looking at Luca's joyful face, it felt like a promise I desperately wanted to keep. I looked up at Marco, who watched us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Satisfaction, certainly, possessiveness, but also something warmer, something almost like relief. "Welcome home, Emma," he said softly. "Welcome to your new life." Luca's hand fit perfectly in mine as he pulled me through the front entrance, chattering about his toys, his books, his new bicycle. The transformation from the silent, withdrawn child of last night was so complete that I had to blink back tears. This was why I'd said yes, this moment right here. A little boy finally feeling safe enough to be a child again. The interior of Marco's home was as breathtaking as the exterior promised. High ceilings, marble floors, artwork that probably belonged in museums. But Luca didn't give me time to gawk, dragging me up a sweeping staircase to the second floor and down a hallway to a room that was clearly his kingdom. His bedroom was enormous, decorated in shades of blue and gray, with shelves full of books and toys that looked barely touched. A massive window overlooked the gardens, and in the corner sat a reading nook with oversized pillows that made me want to curl up and disappear into a story. "This is where I sleep," Luca announced, gesturing to a bed shaped like a race car. "And this is where I keep my favorite books. Papa reads to me every night before bed. Will you read to me too?" "I'd love to," I said, meaning it completely. "And this..." He pulled me toward a shelf displaying intricate Lego constructions. "This is the castle I built with Papa. It took us 3 whole days. And this is the spaceship. And this is... Luca." Marco's voice came from the doorway, gentle but firm. "Let Emma breathe. She just got here." But I didn't want him to stop. I wanted to hear about every toy, every book, every small detail of his life. I wanted to memorize the sound of his voice, so different from the whispered fragments of yesterday. "It's okay," I assured Marco. "I want to see everything." Something flickered in his eyes, approval, maybe, or satisfaction at passing some test I hadn't known I was taking. He leaned against the doorframe, watching as Luca continued his enthusiastic tour, and I felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. After Luca showed me his closet full of clothes organized by color, "Papa likes things neat," he explained with the seriousness of someone twice his age. His bathroom with a step stool so he could reach the sink, and his collection of model cars arranged on a special shelf. He finally wound down, collapsing onto his bed with a happy sigh. "I'm glad you're here, Emma," he said quietly. "It gets lonely sometimes. Papa works a lot, and the nannies never stayed. They always left." My heart broke a little. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart, I promise." That's what the others said, too. The words were a dagger, reminding me that this child had been abandoned over and over by his mother, by the nannies who'd seen a paycheck instead of a person, even by the therapists who couldn't break through his walls. I sat on the edge of his bed, brushing his dark curls back from his forehead. I know you've heard that before. I know you have no reason to believe me. But I'm going to prove it to you, Luca. Every single day, I'm going to prove that I keep my promises. He studied me with those two serious eyes, then reached out and took my hand. Okay, I'll give you a chance. The formal way he said it, like a tiny adult negotiating a business deal, was so much like his father that I had to suppress a smile. That's all I'm asking for. Luca, time to wash up for dinner, Marco said from the doorway. Emma and I need to talk. Luca nodded, squeezing my hand once before scampering off to his bathroom. I stood, smoothing down the blue dress, suddenly nervous about being alone with Marco. In Luca's presence, I could focus on the child, on the purpose that had brought me here. Without that buffer, I had to face the reality of the man I'd agreed to marry. Marco led me down the hallway in silence, past closed doors I didn't dare ask about, until we reached a study that screamed power and wealth. Dark wood, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a desk that probably cost more than a car. He closed the door behind us, and the quiet click felt ominous. Sit, he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. I remained standing. I'm not one of your employees. His lips curved into that dangerous, almost smile. No, you're something far more important. You're about to become my wife. He moved closer, and I fought the urge to retreat, which means we need to establish some ground rules. I thought that's what the prenuptial agreement was for. That covers the legal aspects. This is about the reality of living in my world. He was close enough now that I could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. First rule, your safety is paramount. You go nowhere without security. You don't leave the estate without my knowledge. You don't speak to anyone about my business, about what you see or hear in this house. You mean I'm a prisoner? I mean you're protected. There are people who would love nothing more than to use you against me, people who would hurt you or Luca without hesitation if they thought it would give them leverage. His hand came up to cup my cheek, the gesture tender despite his harsh words. I won't let that happen. And if I want to see a friend, go shopping, have a life outside these walls, you can do all of those things with security present. In time, when the right people know you're under my protection, you'll have more freedom. But not yet. Not until I'm certain you're safe. His thumb traced my lower lip, sending heat through my body. Second rule, in public, you're my devoted wife. You stand at my side, you smile, you make small talk with the right people. You never show fear, never show weakness. The moment people sense vulnerability, they'll exploit it. I'm not an actress. You won't need to act. I'll teach you everything you need to know. His other hand settled on my waist, pulling me closer. Third rule, what happens between us stays between us. Our marriage may have started as a transaction, but I won't tolerate disrespect or defiance. In private, you can question me, challenge me, even argue with me, but never in front of others, never where it could be seen as weakness. Sounds like you want a puppet, not a wife. If I wanted a puppet, I would have bought one. I want you, Emma. Sharp tongue, defiant spirit, and all. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. Fourth rule, Luca comes first, always. His needs, his happiness, his healing, that's your primary responsibility. Everything else is secondary. I already planned on that. Good. He studied my face, his expression unreadable. Final rule, you're mine. Completely. No other men. No flirtations. No looking for an escape. You belong to me now, and I protect what's mine with absolute ruthlessness. The possessiveness should have angered me, should have made me want to push him away, to assert my independence. Instead, it sent a thrill through me that I didn't want to examine too closely. And what about you? I challenged. Do the same rules apply? There is no one else. There hasn't been since Isabella left. I have no interest in anyone except you. His hand tightened on my waist. Does that satisfy your curiosity? Why me, Marco? Really, you could have anyone. Someone from your world who understands the rules, who wouldn't need to be taught everything. Why choose a broke waitress with nothing to offer? Because everyone else wants something from me. Power, money, connections. They see Marco Valente, head of the organization, the man who can make or break careers with a word. His eyes bore into mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. But you didn't know who I was. When you looked at me in that diner, you saw a man pretending to be poor, and you called me on it. You saw through the mask because you weren't blinded by what I could give you. I still took your offer. After thinking about it, after weighing the cost. You're practical, not greedy. There's a difference. He released me suddenly, stepping back. And you were kind to my son when you had no reason to be, when there was nothing in it for you. That kind of genuine compassion can't be bought or faked. Luca sensed it immediately. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling exposed under his gaze. Patricia told me about Isabella, about what happened to Luca. Marco's expression darkened. Did she? She thought I deserved to know what I was walking into. She offered me a way out, and yet you're still here. He moved to the window, staring out at the grounds. What Raphael did to my son, that's a debt I'll never forgive. Isabella's betrayal I could have survived. The theft, the infidelity, even her leaving. But bringing that monster into Luca's life, letting him touch my child. His hands clenched into fists. Some sins are unforgivable. Is he really dead? Do you want the truth, or the comfortable lie? I swallowed hard. The truth. Yes. He died slowly and painfully, and I made sure he understood exactly why he was being punished. His body was never found because there was no body left to find. He turned back to me, his eyes cold as winter. Does that frighten you? It should have. The casual admission of torture and murder should have sent me running. But I thought about Luca's silence, his trauma, the innocence that had been stolen from him. No, I said quietly. It doesn't frighten me. It makes me understand you better. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. You're full of surprises, Emma Sullivan. I'm beginning to think I chose even better than I realized. A soft knock interrupted us. One of the staff, I was going to have to get used to the fact that Marco had staff, poked her head in. Dinner is ready, Mr. Valente, and Luca is asking for Miss Emma. We'll be right there, Marco said, dismissing her with a nod. He offered me his arm, a surprisingly old-fashioned gesture. Ready to have dinner with your new family? I took his arm, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the expensive fabric. As ready as I'll ever be. Dinner was surprisingly normal, all things considered. The dining room could have seated 20, but we ate at one end of the enormous table, Marco at the head, me on his right, Luca on his left. The food was incredible, prepared by a chef who apparently lived on the estate, and Luca kept up a steady stream of chatter throughout the meal. He told me about his school, private, exclusive, with security that made sure he was safe at all times, his favorite subjects, art and reading, and his best friend, a boy named Marcus, whose father apparently worked for Marco, though the details of that work remained vague. Marco watched us both, contributing occasionally but mostly content to let Luca dominate the conversation. And I realized, watching them together, that despite everything, the violence, the darkness, the criminal empire, Marco was a good father, attentive, patient, genuinely invested in his son's happiness. After dinner, Marco carried a sleepy Luca upstairs for his bedtime routine. I followed, uncertain whether I was invited but unable to stay away. In Luca's room, I watched as Marco helped him into pajamas, brushed his teeth, tucked him into the race car bed with a gentleness that made my chest ache. "Will you read to me?" Luca asked, looking at me with hopeful eyes. "Papa always reads to me, but maybe tonight you could?" I glanced at Marco, who nodded. "Choose a book, Piccolo. Something not too long. It's already past your bedtime." Luca selected a story about a brave mouse on an adventure, and I settled on the edge of his bed, reading in the soft lamplight while Marco stood in the doorway, watching. By the time the mouse had found his way home, Luca's eyes were drooping closed. "Good night, sweetheart," I whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Good night, Mama," he murmured, already half asleep. The word hit me like lightning. Mama. He'd called me Mama. I looked up at Marco, tears blurring my vision, and saw an answering emotion in his eyes. Satisfaction, yes, but also something deeper, something almost like gratitude. He followed me out of Luca's room, closing the door quietly behind us. In the hallway, he caught my hand, pulling me to face him. "He's never called anyone that before," Marco said quietly. "Not even Isabella before she left. You've given him something I couldn't buy, couldn't force, couldn't make happen through sheer will. You've given him hope. He's an easy child to love," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And what about his father?" Marco's hand came up to cup my cheek, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. Will he be as easy to love? The question hung between us, weighted with implications I wasn't ready to examine. "I don't know yet. Ask me again after Saturday." His smile was slow, dangerous, full of dark promise. "After Saturday, you'll be mine in every way that matters. I think you'll find I can be very persuasive when I want something." "Is that a threat?" "It's a guarantee." He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. "Sleep well, Emma. Your room is at the end of the hall, the suite next to mine. Everything you need is already there. Tomorrow we have much to prepare." He released me and walked away, leaving me trembling in the hallway, my heart racing and my body aching with a want I didn't fully understand. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Sylvie returned with an army of beauticians who plucked, polished, and pampered until I barely recognized myself. Patricia guided me through the final paperwork, her expression a mixture of concern and resignation, and Marco was everywhere and nowhere, appearing at unexpected moments to check on my progress, to ask if I needed anything, to remind me with a look or a touch that I belonged to him now. Luca was my constant companion when he wasn't at school, showing me every corner of the estate, introducing me to the staff, teaching me the routines that would become my new life. And every night, I read to him at bedtime, and every night he called me Mama, and every night my heart broke and healed a little more. Saturday arrived with crisp autumn sunshine. In my suite, surrounded by stylists and assistants, I was transformed into someone unrecognizable. The wedding dress Sylvie had created was a masterpiece. Simple, elegant, with a neckline that was modest but alluring, and a skirt that moved like water. My hair was styled in soft waves, my makeup subtle but perfect, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who belonged in Marco's world. I saw Mrs. Marco Valente. The ceremony took place in the estate's garden, under an arch covered in white roses. There were perhaps 20 guests, men in expensive suits who radiated danger, women who assessed me with calculating eyes, all of them part of Marco's organization in one way or another, but I only saw Marco. He stood at the altar in a black suit that fit him like sin, his gray eyes locked on me as I walked down the aisle alone. No father to give me away, no family to witness this moment. Just me, taking step after step toward a future I couldn't predict. When I reached him, he took my hands in his, and I felt the tremor in his fingers. The only sign that he was affected by this moment as much as I was. The officiant spoke words about love and commitment and forever, but I barely heard them. I was too focused on Marco's face, on the intensity in his eyes, on the way his thumb traced circles on my palm. "Do you, Emma Sullivan, take Marco Valente to be your lawfully wedded husband?" This was it. My last chance to run, to refuse, to choose a different path. I looked past Marco to where Luca stood, dressed in a tiny suit, holding the rings on a small pillow. He was grinning at me, bouncing on his toes with barely contained excitement. "I do," I said clearly, firmly. "And do you, Marco Valente, take Emma Sullivan to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." He said it like a vow, like a promise, like a threat. "Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Marco pulled me close, one hand cupping the back of my head, the other spanning my waist. And then he kissed me, not the polite, chaste kiss I expected, but something deeper, more possessive, acclaiming in front of everyone who mattered in his world. When he finally released me, I was breathless and dizzy, and the applause from the guests sounded distant and dreamlike. Mine. he whispered against my lips, now and forever. The reception passed in a haze. I smiled and made small talk, and played the role of devoted wife, while Marco's hand remained possessively on my lower back. People congratulated us, though their eyes held calculations about what my presence meant for the organization's dynamics. But then Luca climbed into my lap during dinner, curling against me like a kitten seeking warmth, and whispered, "I'm so happy you're really my mama now." And nothing else mattered. As the sun set and the party wound down, Marco led me inside, up the stairs, past my suite to his own room. My heart hammered as he closed the door behind us, the click of the lock sounding impossibly loud. "Nervous?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Should I be?" "Probably." He crossed to me, his hands gentle as they unfastened the delicate buttons running down my spine. "But you're mine now, Emma. My wife, my son's mother. And I take care of what's mine." The dress pulled at my feet, leaving me vulnerable in delicate white lace. Marco's eyes darkened as they traveled over me, and I felt the heat of his gaze like a physical touch. "Beautiful," he murmured. "So fucking beautiful, and all mine." He lifted me easily, carrying me to the massive bed, and I realized this was really happening. This was my life now, bound to a dangerous man, mother to his traumatized son, queen of a criminal empire I barely understood. But as Marco's lips found mine again, as his hands explored with surprising gentleness, I felt something unexpected bloom in my chest. Not just desire, though that was certainly there. Hope. Hope that maybe this arrangement could become something real, that maybe I could heal Luca, and, in the process, heal the broken parts of myself. That maybe Marco's darkness and my light could balance each other out into something that resembled love. Later, tangled in expensive sheets with Marco's arm heavy across my waist, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how much my life had changed in less than a week. From invisible waitress to mob wife. From alone and struggling to protected and provided for. From Emma Sullivan to Emma Valente. "What are you thinking?" Marco's voice was rough with sleep. "That I don't regret this, any of it." He pulled me closer, his lips brushing my temple. "Good. Because there's no going back now. You're mine forever. Forever." The word that should have felt like a prison sentence, instead, felt like a promise I desperately wanted to keep. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of guards patrolling, ensuring our safety. Down the hall, Luca slept peacefully, finally believing someone would stay. And in this bed, wrapped in the arms of a dangerous man who'd chosen me out of desperation and kept me out of something that might someday become love, I finally felt like I belonged somewhere. I'd traded my freedom for security, my independence for family, my old life for this dangerous new one. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because sometimes the best decisions are the ones that terrify us. And sometimes love grows in the darkest places. Fierce and wild and absolutely unbreakable. I was Emma Valente now, and I was finally, beautifully home.